Good afternoon. My name is Alan Taylor, and on behalf of Dr. Ian Chirwa and our other co-authors, I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to present some preliminary data from the open-label extension phase of the TDF2 study in Botswana. TDF2, as has been presented previously, was a randomized, double-blind, controlled clinical trial, enrolled and randomized 1,219 HIV-negative heterosexual young adults in Botswana between 2007 and 2009. Participants in the trial were randomized to a once-daily combination pill containing tenofovir and emtricitabine, or placebo. 1.2 infections per 100 person years were observed in the TDF-FTC group, compared with 3.1 infections per 100 person years in the placebo group, for a 62% protective efficacy in the modified intention to treat analysis. And again, that's been presented previously. In the TDF2 study protocol, it was specified that if PrEP were shown to be effective, tenofovir emtricitabine would be made available to participants for up to 12 months after study closure in an open-label phase. In addition to assisting former TDF2 participants to remain uninfected, it also provided an opportunity to gather further data regarding the safety, effectiveness, risk behaviors, and adherence to PrEP in a setting more closely approximating programmatic conditions. And today we'll report on baseline characteristics of those participants who enrolled into our open-label extension, as well as some very preliminary visit adherence and safety data. All the results we're presenting today are preliminary and are subject to revision as analysis proceeds. Screening for the open-label phase occurred from February to May of 2013, and inclusion criteria are shown here, and included former TDF2 participants, of course, who were willing and able to provide informed consent, who had normal serum creatinine and phosphorus and creatinine clearance, and if female, were willing to use hormonal contraceptives for the duration of the study. Exclusion criteria included HIV infection, pregnancy or breastfeeding at screening, and other clinical conditions that made the participant unsuitable for enrollment in the judgment of the screening physician. During the study, participants attended monthly follow-up visits, and at each visit, participants were offered a 30-day supply of tenofovir emtricitabine, as well as dual rapid HIV testing, using a rapid test capable of detecting both HIV antigen and antibody for both HIV 1 and 2, and if female, pregnancy testing, as well as adherence counseling. Quarterly visits also included HIV EIA and safety labs, including electrolytes, renal function measures, and risk reduction counseling. Retention strategies for the open-label phase included SMS text messaging and phone calls. In order to more closely approximate programmatic conditions, no reimbursement was provided for study visits, which was a significant change from the randomized portion of the study. And the last exit visits occurred actually last week. We attempted to contact all 1,219 former TDF2 participants. Botswana has a very highly mobile population, and many former participants' contact information was no longer current by the time we attempted screening. We ran newspaper and radio ads to attempt to address this issue prospectively. And of the 736 whom we were able to contact, 582, or 48%, were scheduled for screening. And of these, 334, or 57% of those, attended screening. Upon screening, 20%, or 67, were found to be ineligible for the open-label extension, and the most common reasons for ineligibility are shown in the box on the side here. I've lost my cursor. Reasons for about half of participants who were ineligible simply because they didn't consent to join the study, citing disinterest or lack of time. Pregnancy, lab abnormalities, and HIV infection were other reasons for ineligibility. Of the 267 eligible and who consented to join the study, 229 ended up beginning PrEP, and 38 did not end up returning for their next study visit to start drug. And I'll talk more about this group in the next couple of slides. So of the 267 participants eligible to start PrEP, as I just mentioned, 38 did not end up starting drug. So we compared the 229 who did start PrEP, shown in the middle column, with the 38 who did not. The two groups were really quite similar when stratified by the variables shown here, including site, gender, median age, educational attainment, marital status, employment, median income, and that's quarterly income actually, in dollars, US dollars, median travel time, and in fraction who had had an HIV test since exiting TDF2, the TDF2 study, which incidentally was near 90% in both groups, which may speak to the motivation inherent in this population. In our initial exploration of reasons why these eligible participants, these 38, did not start PrEP, we examined their motivations for joining the study in the first place, since they had all signed a consent form. I'll direct your attention to the first line of this table, where we see that 80% of participants who started PrEP endorsed the statement that one of their motivations for joining the study was that they felt at risk for HIV infection, compared with just 63% of those who joined but did not start drug. Similarly, in the second line, we see that 68% of participants who started drug were motivated by a feeling that a partner was at risk, compared to just 47% of those who didn't start drug. There were no significant differences in specific risk behaviors that we asked about that are shown here, or in social support as motivations for joining the study. Now, like I said, we just finished last week, so we wanted to present some very preliminary analysis of retention in the open label phase. And we found that of the 229 participants who had started PrEP, 125 or 54% completed 12 months of follow-up. And you can see the Kaplan-Meier curve here. We experienced a fair drop-off at months 1 and 2, and then sort of a steady decline thereafter. So at enrollment, we had asked participants to rate their risk of HIV infection over the 6 months prior to that visit, and the risk that they expected to experience over the subsequent 6 months. And for a preliminary analysis of factors associated with study retention, we stratified study retention by these risk perception variables. And you'll see that we chose the cutoff of 10 months rather than 12 to define study completion for this analysis in order to be consistent with an ongoing qualitative substudy, which we had started before most participants had reached their 12-month visits. We found that 69% of those who completed at least 10 months of the study had indicated that they had high or medium perceived risk of contracting HIV over the 6 months prior to screening, compared with 30.8% of those completing less than 10 months. On the other hand, participants' perceived predicted risk over the subsequent 6 months after screening was not associated with whether they completed at least 10 months of the study. The same trend was observed, but the difference did not reach statistical significance in this analysis. Now, a total of 10 severe adverse events involving 8 participants were reported during the study, which were judged to be at least possibly related to study drug. 3 of these resolved spontaneously and were no longer apparent upon later repeat laboratory testing. 4 additional events resolved after a temporary hold of TDF-FTC, including 3 cases of grade 3 hypophosphatemia and 1 case of grade 3 hyperamylasemia. 2 participants discontinued drug permanently due to recurrent grade 3 hypophosphatemia, and 1 participant was found to have grade 3 hyperamylasemia again at the exit visit, which was actually 1 month after discontinuing PrEP, and the participant had not returned to verify resolution of that event. So in summary, we observed higher personal and partner risk perception as a motivation for joining our open-label extension. In addition, participants reporting higher baseline HIV risk perception were more likely to complete at least 10 months of the study compared with those reporting lower baseline risk. Tenofovir emtricitabine for PrEP was safe and well tolerated, with 2 participants out of 239 having to permanently discontinue Truvada due to abnormal lab values. This study presented an interesting opportunity to learn about PrEP under conditions closer to programmatic. And what we saw is that there was high interest in PrEP in our population. 79% of those we were able to contact were interested enough to at least schedule a screening visit. And 86% of those who eventually screened and were eligible started drug. Now, clearly we did have some attrition at the other steps of the cascade that I showed, and we think that improvement in some logistical considerations may have allowed us to improve our enrollment and retention. For example, a delay in study start impacted our ability to contact many participants in this highly mobile population. In addition, the monthly visits and lack of reimbursement for example, travel expenses, may have deterred some from joining or completing the study. As I mentioned, study follow-up just completed last week, and clearly much analysis remains to be done, including further analysis of motivations and risk behaviors, drug levels, for which we collected monthly dried blood spots, and self-reported adherence. We're also completing a qualitative substudy to examine reasons not only for screening loss and early study dropout, but also participants' experiences during the study. In addition to our co-authors, who are listed on the first slide, we'd like to thank our participants, without which these studies would have been impossible, as well as the Botswana Ministry of Health, Gilead Sciences for providing our study drug, colleagues at CDC, and, of course, our TDF2 Open-Label Extension study staff. Kia leboha.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. So we can have 2 or 3 questions. Please.
Kelly Curran from Chapago, thanks. I have 2 questions. The first is, do you have data on the circumcision status of the men enrolled in the study, and is active referral to male circumcision part of the package that's offered to participants? And my second question is whether there were any differences in retention between men and women.
We do have data on the circumcision status, but we didn't have time to include that here, so that'll be forthcoming. And we did not actually actively refer for circumcision during this study, though we were happy to discuss it. And thank you. That'll be part of our further analysis. Thank you.
Is there any other question? Okay, if no, let's thank our speaker and move on to